everyone. I am Laura Ordoñez. I'm here from Common Sense Media. I'm the head of podcast and YouTube ratings and reviews. And I'm very excited to be having an amazing conversation today with some of the creators of Molly of Denali. Now, for those of you who may not know Molly of Denali, it's an animated series that follows a young Alaskan Native girl along with her family and friends as they go through the typical fun adventures, challenges, and learning experiences that so many young people do. But what makes the show so special is its authentic dedication to educate young viewers about Native Alaskan culture in a very open and authentic way. The show has been celebrated for being the first the show has been celebrated for being the first U.S. kids series to cast an Indigenous lead character, Sovereign Bell, who plays Molly. And it sets the bar for creating more kids media that reflects Indigenous perspectives. Both the TV series and the podcast have been recognized as Common Sense selections for the show's commitment to quality kids content and for championing diversity in kids media. So I'm so honored to be joined here today, as I said, by some of its creators. I have here Yatibaey Evans, who is the creative producer, Rochelle Adams, who is a writer and advisor, and Dewey Hoffman, the language advisor for Molly of Denali. So thank you all so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having us, Laura. It's great to meet you.
Of course, it's great to meet you. It's great to put some faces to some great content that's out there and the people who are behind the scenes. So I'd like to just kind of start off with each one of you maybe telling me a little more about yourself, right, as a person, but also how you became part of Molly Denali and just a little more about the role that you play in the creation of the series. So Yatibaey, we'll start with you.
All right. Well, thank you so much again. I'm Yatibaey Evans. I'm Ordoñez Athabascan from the village of Mentasta, Alaska. And my mother is Donna Galbraith from Mentasta. My dad is Jeffrey Mann from Massachusetts. My maternal grandmother is Molly Galbraith from Mentasta, Bansinides, and Susloti. And my maternal grandfather is the late Don Galbraith from Michigan. And I come from a different cultural background from all the folks that I just introduced you to. And that's our traditional way of introducing ourselves. So that you can get to know who our family is, where we come from, what kind of values that have been instilled in us, what kind of personality and characteristics we may have. And I'm really grateful to come from a matrilineal background where I have amazing role models, amazing female role models who have stood strong and been resilient, not only in their own lifetimes, but also representing our ancestors who have made it through over 10,000 years on this land. And I'm a mother of 4 boys, ranging from age 9 all the way to 22. And I've been with the show since February of last year in 2021. And it's just been an amazing opportunity to continue to share our culture, our language, our ways of being with the world. And prior to coming to Molly of Denali, I had the opportunity to be the Alaska Native Education Director for the Fairbanks North Star Borough School District, and was in that role for about a decade and worked with families from all over Alaska, as well as Indigenous tribes from the States. And whoever was a part of, our school system here, we were serving all the students in the academic, social, and emotional capacity, as well as educating all the teachers and principals and administrators on what it takes to work with Indigenous families.
Thank you so much for that background, Yatibaey. I really appreciate it. Rochelle, we'll head over to you next.
Yeah, masicho. Shojrit Rochelle Adams oji. Gwich'in jet atsendu dink edat. Juk Anchorage Gwich'in, Anchorage Guan, Dilak Nai Deneina Nai, Nan Guan Didi, Masicho, Dinjiju Nai. So, hi everyone. I'm super happy to be here. Happy to be amongst my peers. And what I said in my language of Gwich'in, Athabascan, is I grew up in the villages of Fort Yukon and Beaver along the Yukon River up in the Arctic. And I'm here in Anchorage. And this is the homeland of my relatives, the Dena'ina people. I just wanted to acknowledge their stewardship in the past and present, and to say Chinan to them for that stewardship. And I think that, that's something really important also in the show, is that we really acknowledge the Indigenous people, whether it be in Alaska, within our own cultures and communities, or across nationwide, across Turtle Island, is that we acknowledge Indigenous people. And that's been such an amazing thing to use this platform to share, that Indigenous people are still here. We're all of these amazing things, and we put that together into the show, and the including such beautiful diversity. And the show really came from such a warm, group of folks that I consider a family. And since then, I started in 2016 at the inception. And since then, we really have grown. And it really feels like Molly is a part of our family. So I'm happy to kind of share a little bit of our perspective and who we are, and all of the love and the hands and hearts that touch the show and put that into there. So Masicho, thank you all for having us.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. And Dewey, welcome.
Yeah, Bessie, for the invitation. San Huzu, Katlias Uza, Tlega Hut An Aslan, Bedzekta Etan Aslan, Tlaloga Hut An Sadan Slit, Ich the Fairbanks Listo, Ina A Kits Altuna Beuza, It A Kani Ach Beuza, Danaka Hadacha Dik Ech, Dehun Hadaka Hada Dech Ech Irin. I introduced myself in my language, Danaka or Koyukon Athabascan. I'm Dewey, Kk'ołeyo, Hoffman. I'm the Alaska Native Cultural Advisor, and I was also previously a Rural Education Advisor with Molly of Denali. I got involved from the get-go, working closely with Dorothea Gillum and the previous creative producer, Princess Dajrai, and the other advisors who have come together. I always think about, how can this show reflect our real families and loved ones from back home? I come from a very diverse, racially mixed family from all walks of life, and I really do see that represented in the show, from my own mother's people, Koyukon or Tleg Hatan people, to African American experience, the wide array of Indigenous groups in Alaska. If you didn't know, we have over 20 spoken Indigenous languages in our lands, and are working really hard to reclaim that and make it a part of what our children see and experience on a more daily basis. So I'm always excited to see what Molly and Tui and her friends are going to be doing next, and they're always really creative and looking for new things to learn and explore and share it with their friends along the way. So I'm really come at this work from, as a educator for young children, and as a father and uncle, and just really proud of all the creative energy that goes into it and how welcoming and inclusive it's been.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for sharing your beautiful language with us. I really appreciate that as well, especially for the audience listening and watching. I want to kind of play off of something you just said, Dewey, because before we dive into kind of the process that went behind creating Molly and continues to go into it. Something that we really look at Common Sense Media is how are children's different experiences being reflected in media. I think that looked very different even just 10 years ago, if not when we were all children, right? So before diving in, I would love to hear from each of you kind of what was your experience growing up and seeing media and looking for that reflection of your family, your culture in the media you saw. What was lacking? And also, do you remember kind of your first experience with media where you felt some sort of connection there? I'll start with you, Rochelle.
Yeah. Well, growing up, I always think about, what I'm learning is my superpower. And that's that I'm a girl from the village. And I'm very proud of that. And I'm glad to share that in the many spaces that I'm in, and to tell that story and to be authentic and to be proud of who I am. And I have kind of a unique ethnic background. I'm Alaska Native, a couple different Alaska Native groups. I also have a Japanese and Swedish background. So growing up, there was not really a lot of people who seemed to look like me or live the way I did. And I grew up in, rural communities in our villages in Alaska. And a lot of them, they're not on the road system. You have to get to them by boat or by a bush plane. And there's just so many beautiful aspects of life, that I enjoyed growing up, and that taught me, just amazing lessons. And I grew up with such a loving community, but I didn't see that, portrayed in media or things like that. What I was seeing on TV with Native people were usually negative things. And so, it's really heartwarming to be able to share things and to see that joy and happiness reflected in young people across the state. And I mean, we get feedback from nationwide of, not only Indigenous people, but all sorts of people and all sorts of young ones that, once we open that door of diversity, there's just so many things we can share. And it's really heartwarming. I'm so happy now that, my nieces and nephews can watch the show and be like, oh, she said Masi Cho just like us. She's speaking our language, or she has a grandpa that looks like my grandpa, or they're out on the river or in a bush plane. So those are the kinds of things that I'm just so overjoyed to see, the light in our kids' eyes when they watch the show and they're able to see something that accurately reflects who they are.
That's beautiful. And Dewey, what about you?
Yeah, so we grew up in various coastal regions of Alaska, in the rural areas, and we had public TV. So I remember seeing cutaways, mainly from, I think, Sesame Street, where they would show real Alaska Native ivory carvers and dog sled mushers. And I remember thinking, hey, that's me, that's where I'm from. And it was real people. This was probably back in the 80s and 90s. I'm not sure when those would have been filmed, but prior to that. And of course, I loved my cartoons, like, X-Men or other shows, but never really felt connected to any of the characters in the way that this show might. And it's just really kind of been amazing to learn and grow in this field of educational children's media. And I'm not even sure how it happened, but a lot of my family and friends ended up being featured on like the interstitials, the cutaways in between the stories. and just showcasing their interests in sports or different activities or going to real places that people have connections to. So I think what we're doing now and what we're involved with is way beyond anything that I've seen growing up and being multiracial, Koyukon Athabascan from Ruby and Swiss American from Switzerland by way of Washington State. This has led to new connections, and hopefully our kids do see themselves and are proud of what they're seeing on TV or their iPad.
Yatibaey.
So when I was a child, we didn't have television at home until I was in about third grade. So I didn't, really connect to any television at that time. But I do remember being in school, and what was taught to us was more of a historical concept of who Indigenous people are. And, being somebody from an Alaska Native tribe, people didn't really understand when we were living in Michigan or Seattle that, there are Alaska Native people and that there are, a multitude of tribes. We have 229 different tribes here in Alaska. And being able to share a little bit about who we are and the culture that we come from was always awe-inspiring in the classroom, and really fueled, I believe, kind of the path that I've been a part of growing up. And prior to Molly, though, there was only 1% of characters on television that were Indigenous. And so having the ability to share Molly, her story, all about Alaska, the different cultures that we're all a part of, is just an amazing opportunity to share the real authentic stories of our lives and who we are, and the rich traditions and families that we have, and the values that have sustained us.
Thank you. Well, what I love about all three of those experiences that you shared is they share this kind of background of maybe not seeing certain things or not enough in media or things that were being projected around you as children, but now coming into this space as adults, having children in your life, right? Whether that's as a parent or family members, right? And saying, well, then I'll just create that. If it's not out there, then we'll create it. And I think that that's something just so beautiful, especially nowadays with, the advancement in technology and information, right? Where there's no excuse to not have that out there. So having those experiences growing up and now being able to kind of share those through Molly, I'd love to hear from each of you just how your experiences and then where you're at now, how that influences what you do specifically on the back end of creating Molly of Denali. So Dewey, I'd love to start with you, especially I find it so interesting, your role in being the language advisor. I'd love to hear more about how you add your experiences into that and why it's so important in the creation of Molly of Denali, excuse me.
Sure. So I'm definitely a language advocate, but we do have several individuals with a language advisor role, depending on if it's Koyukon Athabascan or Gwich'in or Inupiaq. So I'm one of the overall Alaska Native advisors. So I am multilingual, and my partner's from Nome, Inupiaq territory. So we're trying to speak to our daughter and learn alongside her our heritage languages of Tanaka and Inupiaq. And there's always more to learn. As a second language learner, I try to make it fun and engaging for others to get interested in their language learning journeys, or support them on their path to reclaiming our native languages. There's always in the classroom or doing activities with kids ways you can incorporate native language. I just visited a couple rural villages this past week, and we did some activities around kinship terms and how you call your older brother or younger sister, things like that. And I always encourage our community members and really everyone that anyone can learn an Indigenous language and anyone can teach. So, for example, my dad, who is non-native, lived in the territory of Nunavut back in the 70s, before it was Nunavut and learned Inuktitut. And then when he lived up in Alaska later in life, he could converse pretty easily with the Nukpak language speakers because they're related. So I always try to help people remember too that we are related for many, many generations, and our people, it's been common to learn across dialects and across languages. Because really, when I think about it globally, there's one spoken language and then lots of different vocab. So as a Alaska Native language learner and having studied world languages too, when I was in high school and college, living abroad, I know that the only limitation is giving it a try and putting myself out there and being comfortable with making mistakes and not being perfect from the start, but trying to stay positive along the way. So it's always important to encourage each other as Alaska Native language learners. And whenever I just think about the kids and their excitement for learning or singing and drumming, that's really what keeps me going, along with all the paperwork that I have to do.
All the adult stuff, right? Well, I think that's what's really beautiful about Molly is, listening to, I listened to it before I watched it, I'll just say, because, as the head of podcasts, ratings and reviews, we listened to Molly of Denali, and to find out that came kind of really to help engage in the TV show is really amazing. But I think one of the things that came out of that, when you listen only, and it's only audio at first, you hear everything, right? And one of the things that was so beautiful was that language, and that follows into the show, the TV series. And it's very evident that that's intentional, but as you said, made fun, because I think at that age, that 4 to 8 age, even a little bit older, for kids, their minds are so open. And I know that we've seen some reviews on our own reviews, because we have parents and kids who can leave reviews on our reviews. Several of the parents have said, it's so cool because my child, they'll use some of the language they hear, and they may not be, have an Indigenous background, but they're using that language because it excites them, and their favorite characters are using that language. So I think that that's really exciting, not only reflecting Indigenous cultures, but also allowing others in this world and other kids to see, wow, look at the world around me, look at the people around me, and look at how much beauty they have to offer. And language is a huge part of that. So that's really felt within the show. Yatibaey, let me know kind of a little bit about what your experience has really helped. How has that helped you in what you do and the work you do as a creative producer?
Getting to know the many different, Alaska Native tribes as a director of the program has really provided a wealth of information that has carried into sharing in the show. And not only that job experience, but that life lived experience, and knowing that we all come from a variety of backgrounds, whether it's culturally or linguistically, or with our families, different, family makeups, if we're living with two parents or one, or grandparents or aunties, uncles, if we're moving around. All those different types of experiences have lent themselves to really being able to creatively think in the process and provide this accurate representation that all of our team members strive, our hardest to do. And also, I believe that, working in a very diverse community and different experiences has allowed me to understand different communication styles and what is helpful in the workplace, working with a multitude of different people, and really providing an insight into our communication styles as different Alaska Native peoples, and the fact that it may be different for Rochelle, and maybe different for Dewey, maybe different for myself and our other advisors that we have on the team, and helping each one of us to keep that in mind as we're all working towards, the success of the show. And it's been pretty incredible to also bring in language, as Dewey was mentioning, into every episode. Our goal is to have at least 2 Alaska Native words in each episode, and have it flow in a way that kids can pick it up without us defining it each time. And it just becomes a natural, integration into their own conversation. And not only, I think is it important to have our Alaska Native words a part of the show, but also our values, which is another goal of ours. So our Alaska Native values are a part of every episode. And we're teaching kids about respect and honoring our elders, working together in a community. What does it mean to be a steward of the land? And we're hearing all sorts of incredible stories from the audience of how kids themselves are incorporating what they're learning into their daily lives. We had a recent episode on vetch, and vetch is invasive to Alaska. And I've heard from folks in our community here in Fairbanks about how their kids are out there in the summertime. We got to pull this vetch up, Dad. We can't let the vetch, survive, and because it takes over the plants and our gardens and doesn't allow them to grow. And so that's a problem. And so teaching about the environment and what's important is also an incredible communication within the show.
Thank you. And Rochelle, for you, what has your experience added to the work you do as a writer and advisor for the show? How has that kind of guided you within that?
Yeah, I go back to the initial sit down with Dewey, and we had a couple other cultural advisors that are elders, and we really sat down and took a real deep dive into our culture and what we wanted to share. And that time was always so special to me. I feel like I'm always learning, especially from the elders, and I'm so glad that we have the elder cultural advisors on our team. And the language has always been a really important piece for me too. Dewey and I both have been language educators, learners, cultural teachers for a while, and I think that's kind of how we got roped into the show. But it's really allowed me to be just prideful, like so proud, of who we are as Alaska Native people. And when we do celebrate those successes or get those good feedbacks from communities, I like to say that we're holding a mirror up to our Indigenous communities and our beautiful, diverse communities, because they are so special. And, I want to take everyone along for this ride and to just, enjoy the success and enjoy the, sharing our stories and controlling the narrative. And that's a big part for me too, is just being able to bring my Indigenous self into this space and to feel like it's authentic, and to have that ability and the privilege to share these stories and to weigh in on all of these stories. That's a big thing that the Alaska Native Cultural Advisors do, is we weigh in to make sure that what's being written and portrayed is really accurate to who we are. And it's just been such an honor to make sure that it is true to the way that we live. And so there's been some funny learning lessons with that too. And but it's also, pulls a lot from the cultural knowledge that we have, how we were raised, and values like Yatibaey mentioned, that we carry in the way we walk upon the earth. So it's brought a lot. It's really enriched my life, and I try to really be portray our stories accurately. And it's just so much fun. I really enjoy working with everyone, and it's just, I'm so proud of the journey. It's been incredible, and I just really look forward to what's to come.
And I like that you mentioned really controlling the narrative. I think that what we've seen in the past, as we've kind of all talked about growing up, I know from my perspective when I was younger, everything was very one-sided, and it was very superficial when there was any representation in kids media, but especially when it came to Indigenous representation. It didn't feel like actual representation, right? It just felt like kind of a gloss over, very oftentimes very stereotypical. So I just wonder, from each of you, coming into creating a show like Molly of Denali, where you get to control that narrative, you get to have that, blank slate of here it is, right, for kids to see. What was maybe one large misconception, unknown, or stereotype you really wanted to break with this show? I'll start with Dewey.
There's a few different examples I could choose from. There's, of course, the perception of what does a Native person look like. If they're wearing jeans, they're not maybe not traditional or Native enough or something like that. It's like, well, you don't wear your tuxedo every day. Like you hold out for special occasions to wear your regalia and things like that, so that it stays sharp. I guess one example that maybe is specific to including our languages is I thought it would be fun to talk about the different types of snow. There's the trope about, and there's 100 ways to say snow in Eskimo, what people refer to as Eskimo, which might be Yupik or Nupik or one of the Canadian Inuit dialects. And I was like, well, let's include that in the show. So we had Grandpa Nat walking around outside showing Molly, this is Seat Kudla, the really fluffy kind of snow. And this is the Seat Tena, the chomp down snow on the trail. And did you know there's this other type of snow that's called sugar snow, like all these different varieties. I thought that was kind of cool, because it was showing other people that these real terms exist, and you got to know what the weather conditions are and anticipate your needs, whether you're traveling or hunting or needing to get around. And it's deeply embedded in our connection with the land. So sometimes it is, very, you have to pay close attention to make sure that you don't go through the ice, or that you're doing everything you can to stay safe out on the trails or out where you need to go. And survival skills are definitely a must, and these connections to our homelands that's been accumulated over a long time. I want to see that continue, and I guess that might be misinterpreted, like especially with Disney, right? Like walking around singing with the birds and communicating with the animals. Well, I actually do communicate with birds, and they, I negotiate with them when I'm out moose hunting. I'm like, hey, little chickadee, if you point me in the right direction for a daniga, for a moose, I'll let you chew on the moose hide when I hang it up to dry. Like, okay, like swarm in a certain direction. And that's something I learned from a native elder, and I tried it out, and that stuff is real. It's not it shouldn't be cast in a certain light or like made fun of, or native knowledge is sacred knowledge, and it comes from a real place and real human experience. So I guess that's one thing that I would also mention too.
I love that. That kind of juxtaposition of that, because it's so true. I mean, you do see that in a lot of fairy tale like or Disney movies, right? But there is a connection, right, with the earth, with nature, and it doesn't need to be made to seem like something silly or childish. It's real, and I love that you connected that, especially within how Molly is really trying to portray that. Yatibaey, for you, what was something that you really wanted to be able to portray or break through within controlling that narrative?
I think one of the biggest things is that we're here and we're thriving and we're part of everyday society, and we have, a multitude of, cultural connections that are still alive in us and in our families, and that we're carrying on the traditions of our ancestors that we've been taught about in the school system, but not everybody has learned that Indigenous people are still a part of all society. And I think it's also challenging because technically we're like about 1.5% of the total population in the U.S. And so some people don't get that opportunity to meet Indigenous people, but being able to share who we are and about, the fact that we're not a monolithic group here in Alaska, that we have lots of different tribes here and ways of living and languages is such an incredible opportunity in media today. And that we have civil rights advocates as well, like Elizabeth Peratrovich, and that we're healthy and productive and leading, lives that other kids can look up to and see as role models. I think it's really important to have this Indigenous representation in mainstream media so that kids all over can look up to see who we are, and that they have, other people that are in this world that are similar to them, lead similar lifestyles. And I love the fact, Dewey mentioned earlier, the interstitials where we're sharing about, experiences of kids here in Alaska and what we like to do. And everybody watching gets an opportunity to connect to our real actual lives, in addition to what is seen in animation through Molly of Denali.
Thank you. Yeah, I think breaking through that view that there's a monolith, especially for any Indigenous culture, right? I think that was something that's been for too long has gone on as that generalized perspective. But I think what we see especially in this next generation, is their minds are so open and they're ready to just call things out, which I love, and expand the conversation. And I think that being able to do that at this age is beautiful because this is where it starts, right? And Rochelle, for you, what was that breakthrough that you kind of wanted to have with being part of Molly?
Well, yeah, I guess when we first started, you don't know what you don't know, but I just know that the journey was incredible and what an opportunity. And the first thing that was on my mind was my own experiences, of going outside of Alaska. And of course, everyone's always excited that you're from Alaska, but it always came with these questions of, oh, you're from Alaska, and then here comes so you live in an igloo, so you're an Eskimo, so you drive a dog team to school. Maybe I did drive a dog team, but I just felt the need for Indigenous representation and education. Like, I really agree with everything that Yatibaey and Dewey is saying. I feel a lot of the same way with representation and just, we have so many cultures across the state. I appreciate Dewey bringing up the term Eskimo, but because for so long we've been, given names such as Eskimo or Indian, and we come from so many cultures. I'm Gwich'in Athabascan, and it's really, your preference and your terms that you choose to, that connect you with your identity, and having that grounding, by knowing your culture, knowing your language, knowing who you are, who your Indigenous family is, really helps build that just positivity in all areas of your life. It helps with success in all areas of your life, for children and in their schooling and everything. So I just wanted to really share, who we are and educate folks. And, like Yatibaey was saying, we're out there living our lives. Indigenous people are, we're everywhere. And, this is Indigenous land as well. And so to just start with that acknowledgement, I really hope that, this will change the way we walk upon the earth together, in our diversity, celebrating who we are. And it's a lot more than just, one measure of success. For far too long, we've had, just one way of looking at things. And that's really a disservice to all of the beautiful cultures and ways of knowing and stories and just all of the things. And so it's just such an honor to be able to share some of that. And I'm really excited, to see other Indigenous people and other people of color coming up and sharing their stories too. It's so much fun. And I just really look forward to what's to come. It's just exciting. So
thank you for sharing that. And, as you mentioned, I think what's beautiful about Molly as well is that there are so many different kind of cultures and experiences represented in that through the different characters, whether they're kind of staple characters or those that you see come in through different episodes. So I want to ask each one of you, is there a character from Molly that's maybe either a staple character or it's been come on that you feel you relate to most? And if not, is there a character that you'd love to see in the future that you feel like you could relate to? So Yatibaey, I'll start by asking you that one, the hard-hitting question.
Well, I'm just going to say Molly. She reminds me of myself as a curious and energetic, adventurous little girl, and always wanting to find out why something is happening. And I remember my grandmother telling me all the time, "You're just so nosy." And It was just because I was curious and wanted to figure things out. And, as a young girl, my dad was a dog musher. And so, being outside was a huge part of our lives growing up. And I still carry that now. And I'm so grateful that, the creativity that Rochelle and Dewey and Princess and Adeline and Luke Titus and all those that were involved really put a lot of thought and love into creating Molly and all of the characters. But I heard Princess recently say that it was really important that we create Molly to be a representation of all of us as young Indigenous, women, and that we're able to really reflect our own lives through her. And, coming into the show and being a part of it, Kaya is fictional. And so it's like really sharing the best parts of our, experiences and really the bright light, which I'm so grateful for, because for too long, a negative, perception was out there about who we are as Indigenous people. And so this has just been such a wonderful opportunity to see Molly and all of the characters represented in such a great way.
Great. Dewey, do you have a character you feel like you relate to?
Yeah, well, in my life, I was really fortunate to get to know my 3 sets of grandparents really well because my mom was adopted. And I love the relationship that Molly has with Grandpa Nat, and really want to know where the, how to, where's Grandma, where's Sitsu, and how can we introduce her? And there's several aunties, but sometimes I lose track of the family tree, but I would like to see more direct grandparents come to life on the show, just because, well, in our villages and in our native way, you call the elders, like who's your grandparents' generation, you call them grandma or grandpa, Sitsu or Sitsia, out of respect. But I'd really love to see that ancestral line and family history be explored. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
And Rochelle, is there a character for you?
Yeah, I love all of them. No, I really do love Molly. I feel the connection. I love Grandpa Nat and their connection. But I'm going to have to say I did write a story, and it's called Molly of the Yukon. And something super near and dear to me is the way I grew up around fishing in the Yukon River for king salmon. And so I was able to write a new character into that episode, and his name is Cliff. And he's modeled after my late father, who, really taught me all about subsistence, our ways of life, hunting, fishing, trapping, all of those things. And so it was just incredible to be able to portray him in that way. And so I have to say Cliff is my favorite character. And, I just really appreciate the way we're able to share these stories. And, like fishing it's a big topic right now. We haven't been able to fish on the Yukon River for a few years. And so, a lot of us are thinking about that, and it's kind of heavy on our hearts, and where a lot of people are doing work to bring back the fisheries. And so I was just really glad to portray that stewardship, that we've been talking about, and those values. So, yeah, but I do love them all.
I love that connection. Thank you for sharing that story about being able to create a character like that. I mean, that's so special. And I think that's what makes this show so special, just having this conversation now. I mean, you can listen to it as I did at first and then watch it and enjoy it, but to really understand what's gone behind creating it, and not only how intentional it's been and authentic it's been, but the love that I can tell is coming from each and every one of you as you discuss the creation of Molly of Denali, has been very apparent. So as we close out this conversation, I think I just want to ask one more question. And looking forward, Molly of Denali has really set that standard, as I said earlier, of Indigenous representation in kids media. And I think that there's obviously so much more opportunity now to create that in the right way, in TV, in movies, in books, and podcasts. So I guess for each one of you, just a final insight into where you think there's that opportunity and what's needed out there in kids media when it comes to Indigenous representation. And I'll start with Rochelle.
Yeah, I mean, the need is everywhere. I'm excited for another project we're doing is some of these episodes will be in our languages. I'm really excited about using them for language tools. We have curriculum with some of the stories, and I think that, it can be used in the schools. I would love to see more of our traditional stories included. There's just so much more, I mean, I would love to see it everywhere. Something that I do remember when we had screenings of the show was showing it to we have a Native Language Institute in the Flats for the Gwich'in language, and showing it to the elders there, especially the episode called Grandpa's Drum, which is about boarding school and loss of culture and reclamation of culture. It's just it can be a tool, to talk about things that aren't always easy to talk about. And so even seeing the elders watch the cartoons, with tears in their eyes of joy was amazing. So this can be used everywhere. I would love to see it everywhere, and to just incorporate more stories and encourage people to share their own stories, and hopefully inspire people to want to learn more about our cultures. So there's a lot out there, and a lot that can be shared.
And Dewey, what are your thoughts on, what the opportunity is out there to expand really that Indigenous representation in all different forms of media?
Yeah, I think one thing that sticks out with Molly is how the characters, especially the young children, really are agents of change. And whenever they encounter a situation and have to problem solve or use critical thinking, the adults are really supporting them, but not kind of like telling them exactly what to do. And that's such a real example of Indigenous instruction and training. I was taught as a sewer or working on any skill that, I had to give it a shot and then go ask for advice and feedback. It was really up to me as the self-empowered learner to kind of drive forward, and no one was hollering at me or telling me, to keep going. I had to find that encouragement and will to figure it out. And I see that in the show, and that's intentional for the scripts that I've been able to kind of advise in. And one of my favorite settings is being in the writer's room and seeing all these ideas percolate and the creative energy. And there's probably like 5 to 10 premises or ideas, seeds of ideas that are created, and then one of them is chosen to go to script. So there's a lot of topics we can still explore. I'd like to see more about intergenerational healing, I'd like to see more about the real conversations going around. How do we meet the needs that we have today with our modern style, and make sure that future generations are protected and have a clean place to live and clean drinking water, and can also get about where they need to go. That's something that I'd like to see more of. And yeah, just kind of how it really is important to maintain that creativity and that authentic sense of who we are in this place in the world. When we have village English represented in the show, when we have our native foods represented in the show, our real ceremonies, real singing that's been created specifically for this, you can instantly tell. And I think that is appealing to people in an age where there's such a formula for what is a good plot or what is a good script. The climax and the rising action and the resolution and all that stuff, and in a lot of our traditional stories, even, it's like they arrive at a destination or a place and like, yeah, there's more to do. It's not completely resolved. And maybe when you go back to the story from time to time, you'll pick up something new. And I just wanted to also give a shout out to Spirit Rangers. So cool that they're getting involved. I actually discovered that one of my friends adapted one of our traditional Koyukon stories into the show about Porcupine Woman crying on the beach. I thought that was incredible. So not directly affiliated with Molly, but just an example of how other platforms are engaging Alaska Native knowledge and our real history and stories.
I love that. Yeah, you're seeing it expand, which is what we can hope for, all we can hope for, right? Yatibaey, what about for you? What do you think is the change that can be made and the growth?
Well, I really, just also hats off to all the different Indigenous shows with Indigenous characters that have been coming out in recent years, and recognizing the need for both that on-screen and off-screen representation, because in order to represent and have real authentic stories on screen, then we need those voices a part of the production, from brainstorming of ideas and all the way through, so that there's this accuracy and truth that comes forward in on screen. And the older model of production, had perhaps one cultural advisor, and it was typically towards the end of the production process. And to now have, a wide, several different shows, including, of course, Molly of Denali, have our Indigenous people a part of it, from, the writer's room, from the brainstorm of characters, from, the inception of the show. Has just been an incredible opportunity. And I really think that it has been why it's been so successful, and also has become such a model for how a production could become. And I just am grateful for the inclusion and also the learning process that has been happening. And I think that we need to create more opportunities for Indigenous people all across the country to learn about writing and to learn about creating animation, being involved in media, and make that also a part of our lifestyles, so that we can continue to have influence and more representation.
I think that's so huge. Yeah. Being able to create those opportunities for learning that. So there are more Indigenous peoples in the space of creating media, right? And knowing how to do that and making that accessible. Well, I appreciate you all so much for being here. If we didn't already love the show and feel connected to it, we feel more connected to it after hearing what's kind of goes on behind the scenes and the love and the passion and the authenticity that you all and everyone else who works on the show puts into it. So thank you all again so much for being here, for taking the time. And anyone watching, please make sure to check out our reviews of Molly of Denali, the TV series, as well as Molly of Denali, the podcast. You can watch the show on PBS Kids, and you can listen to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you listen to your podcast. So thank you again, and we appreciate you for being here.
Tana, Laura.
That's it.